Hello, and welcome back to Crush Your Cravings Masterclass. We have a treat for you. We're talking with Dr. Patricia Mills, and we are going to be talking all about cravings and hormones and really get into strategies on how to be successful throughout the holidays.
That's right. Thanks for having me today, Kathy. Much appreciated.
It's my pleasure. I'm just going to start off with a little background about Dr. Mills, and then we'll get into the questions. And then I would love for you to just kind of share with us how you got into this work as well.
Great.
So, Dr. Mills is a distinguished medical specialist with a unique blend of expertise in physical medicine and rehabilitation and functional medicine. Her career spans clinical practice, research, and education, making her a well rounded authority in the field. She holds an impressive array of academic credentials, including she's gotten her MD from the University of Toronto, master's in healthcare and epidemiology from the University of British Columbia. And her specialty is in physical medicine and rehabilitation at UBC. She's certified in functional medicine from the Institute for Functional Medicine, and she is really committed to sharing her knowledge. She utilizes various platforms for educating on YouTube. The Dr. Patricia Mills, MD, is how you reach her there. Instagram at Dr. Patricia Mills, and Facebook is Wild Wisdom for Women with Dr. Patricia Mills. She's on LinkedIn, and she's got a podcast with the same name, Wild Wisdom with Dr. Patricia Mills. Well, thank you so much for being here. And, she is a trusted guide to really optimize well-being through evidence-based medicine and root cause solutions. And so we're just really blessed to have you here tonight.
Thank you so much for having me, Kathy.
You're welcome. So could you just start off with kind of a little bit of your background and why you got your MD and then went into the functional medicine?
Yeah, so I went into medicine because I wanted to help people, and I love the specialty of physical medicine and rehab because it was very holistic for traditional Western medicine. We look at the whole body and use various different modalities. So I always enjoyed that. And then what happened was that a couple of things. My dad was diagnosed with ALS, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, or Lou Gehrig's disease, and it came as a huge surprise because there's no family history, and he seemed to be doing all the right things, quote unquote. And then I myself was noticing with my health that things weren't going super well with me, in terms of how I was doing, even though I also thought I was doing all the right things. And when I started looking around me with different eyes, eyes that are not the traditional Western medicine trained eyes, but more of saying, why are things happening? Like, why is this man been diagnosed with this? Why am I experiencing these things? And that question of why really led me down a different road. And at the time, I was a researcher, published, invited to present at international conferences on my research studies. And I was pretty good at reading research and interpreting. So I started diving into that, and I started finding these root causes that we weren't taught in medical school for reasons, various reasons. And when I started understanding those root causes and applying them into my own life, things started to shift, things started to get better. And I found the area of functional medicine, which you could also cause as root cause medicine. And that actually is a group of physicians and clinicians who also probably experienced something like I did, which is a big wake-up call. Someone you love or yourself gets sick, and it forces you to learn beyond the traditional Western medicine training, because otherwise it's pretty draining already to be a doctor, lots of things on your plate. And so it takes something really extra like that to motivate you on your own time to learn more, right? Beyond what we're trained and what we're taught. So once I certified in functional medicine, I started, incorporating that into my practice. And I got really passionate about teaching people this information, this health wisdom. And now that's what I do part-time is, part-time clinical practice in functional medicine, part-time public health education, and in particular, women's health. But in my clinical practice, I see men and women.
Okay, wonderful. Well, that is great. I mean, how did that kind of shift help your family or even yourself after your dad was diagnosed?
Yeah, so he passed away, unfortunately, before I could acquire the tools. And, the thing is, once you're diagnosed with something that severe and you're really, really far along the road of that disease, it's really difficult to reverse out of it. It requires heroic action. When you're in the early course of the disease, or even hopefully before you started developing it, that's when a little bit of effort makes a big difference.
Yeah.
Later on, you need a lot of effort to make a small difference. So unfortunately, I wasn't able to help him specifically. But I've noticed already with my family, with my friends, with my loved ones, and then obviously with my patients, the results are phenomenal, right? What you see. And so that's always my big motivation, is hearing people, even on my YouTube videos, comment saying, "Oh my goodness, I put these recommendations, these teachings into action, and these are the results that I got." And that's my favorite part of the day, is, receiving that feedback, which is really great.
Wonderful. Well, we're just going to dive in because we got a lot to uncover, especially around, hormone imbalance and cravings and appetite. We're headed into the holidays, and there's going to be a feast of, uh, kind of grazing during the course of the day, and then, the day after, and there's just a lot of food, number one, but then there's a lot of sweets as well. Can you kind of break down the what leads us um hormonally to want to eat and also kind of overindulge during this time?
Absolutely. Whenever I address a topic like this, I like to categorize things. So the way I approach whole body health is with the 4 pillars that I've identified a lot through the research. And those are: number one, hormone balance; number two, gut health; number three, the stress response, whether it's physical, emotional, mental, or spiritual; and number four is toxins tolerance. So I could address this question through any one of these portals, and they're all interlinked, right? So, for example, when we're talking about hormone balance, in contribution to problems with food cravings.
Hmm.
So you can, develop food cravings as a result of hormone imbalance, and there's different kinds of hormone imbalances that will lead to food cravings. So, for example, number one would be through an imbalance of your blood glucose and how that affects your insulin hormone. And I'm sure your viewers are, pretty familiar with this by now, but just as a little review, there's 3 different kinds of carbohydrates. So the first kind are your simple sugars. So that's the simplest kind of sugars. It's your glucose, your sucrose, your fructose, your lactose. And they're simple because they're available, usually in white powdered sugar, whether it's from maple sugar, coconut sugar, or beet sugar. In the end, it's very refined, right? That those simple sugars, and they're very quickly broken down in the gut and absorbed into the blood, and you get a big spike of blood sugar, blood glucose, in response to that, your body has to make the hormone insulin. Now, your body always makes insulin in response to blood glucose, but if you have too much glucose showing up in the body all at once, then your body has to make a massive amount of insulin. And over time, that overproduction of insulin can lead to a problem with the hormone insulin balance. And it's called insulin resistance, for example, is one of them, where your body then becomes resistant to insulin. And so the job of insulin is to tell the cells, please open up. We've got a lot of glucose in the blood. So when insulin is working, when the body is sensitive to insulin, those cells will open up, the glucose goes in, it's used for energy, and everyone is happy, right? The tissues are happy, they've got enough energy. But when you develop insulin resistance, you then have a problem with those cells opening up. The glucose doesn't go into the cells as well as they should. So the cells enter a state of starvation, and they don't have enough glucose within them to do their job. So it's kind of this paradox where you have abundance in the blood, lots of glucose floating around, but not enough glucose getting into the tissues. That'll send a signal to your body saying, we don't have enough energy, you must eat more.
Hmm.
So that's one way of developing a hormone imbalance that will cause food cravings. Now, the portal of gut health is very interesting because this research is just published in 2023, so hot off the press. And what they're showing is that when you eat foods that harm gut health, and specifically harm the health of your gut microbiome, and the gut microbiome are the organisms living in the gut the parasites, bacteria, fungi, and they live there and they're supposed to be there. But just like any community, you want them to be a healthy community that's contributing to the functioning of the body rather than detracting. And what happens is that we now know, and we didn't know this before, is that ultra processed foods, even if they're labeled healthy, organic, natural, baked, gluten-free, dairy-free, low fat, high protein, all of the buzzwords, the keywords that all the food industry knows will get your attention and will get you to reach and buy that thing thinking it's a healthy option, it's a health food. Those foods, more often than not, contain components and ingredients in them that we now know are harming our gut microbiome to the point where the scientists are seeing changes in the gut microbiome. And not only that, they're actually seeing the development of another hormone imbalance called leptin resistance. Now, this is fascinating. Have you heard of leptin resistance, Kathy? Like I
I
just
have. Yeah.
Curious. Yeah, right. So it's so interesting because the body is, when it's in good health, it's just this very intricate balance and dance of hormones, right? And leptin is a hormone produced by fat cells. And the job of leptin is to cross into the brain and say, I'm satisfied. I've had enough. I do not need to eat more. It is the exact opposite of a food craving. It's like the satiety signal.
Mhm.
And leptins are produced by fat cells, and you would think that the more fat cells you have in the body, the more leptin you would have, and therefore the less hunger you would have, right? But actually, the body, as with everything, has a Goldilocks zone, the zone within which, too much or too little doesn't work, but within the zone, it works very well. So if you have enough fat, not too little fat, but enough fat on your body, you're going to be getting those good leptin hormone signals. If you have too much fat, after a certain point, the body is being inundated with leptin. And now the brain becomes resistant to leptin. It no longer responds to the leptin signal. So it no longer has this cue of satiety. And what you're left with is overeating and weight gain.
Yeah.
And so they've actually studied this in women. And they've seen that women who eat ultra processed foods compared to women who don't, like, so it's a spectrum, right? It's not like you're going to eat zero, right? So it's like they compared women who ate more versus women who ate less. So you don't have to be perfect, but you do have to be aware and make conscious decisions. And women who ate more ultra processed foods had the dysfunction in the gut microbiome and leptin resistance. Now, again, I just really want to highlight this. More often than not, those ultra processed food additives are in food packaging that if you read it, it sounds divine. It sounds like absolutely the right thing, especially gluten-free, dairy-free, low fat, organic, all natural, baked, whole wheat. But if you actually start to look at the ingredient list, so the list of ingredients in that food, you will start to notice that they will either have lots of hidden sugars. So there's 56 different names for sugar. So it'll either have that or it'll have a lot of what we call the inflammatory supporting oils. So vegetable seed oils like canola oil, sunflower, safflower, soybean, corn. Or it'll have food additives. So that's like your polysorbate 80, your CMC, sodium benzoates. Basically, a chemical name that you don't understand is typically a food additive. And we now know that those food additives, they were allowed into our foods because they don't absorb well into our body. So the food scientists and the regulation bodies said, well, it's not going to get into our bodies, so it's okay. But now we're discovering that by virtue of it staying in our gut, it's harming our gut microbiome. And that's what's causing the downstream effect. And there's many things, like you get more belly fat, you get more hormone imbalance, and the list goes on. You get the actual gut disruption, like problems with constipation, diarrhea, or combination of both, belly bloating. So I believe that, and it's not just a belief, it's a fact that a lot of what we're seeing and experiencing, and this was one of my problems, right? What I said, what was happening with me was unknowingly eating foods that we think are good for us, but are actually sabotaging our health.
Mm-hmm. Well, can you kind of break down? You talked about fats and leptin, and I know that from what you shared, um, it's going to signal when it's working properly that it's you're full and you don't need any more. When it becomes resistant, Can you talk about that that layer of belly fat and the association with the leptin being resistant?
Yeah, so there's different kinds of fat. So, and some of the fat is good and some of the fat is not good. So, and some of the fat is good, but in too much quantities is not good either. So the fat that can be good in enough quantities, it's called the subcutaneous fat. And that's the fat that you find underneath the skin and gives the plumpness to the cheeks, plumpness to the breasts, to the thighs, and gives you that womanly figure. For men, the fullness of the face, right? When you see someone who's really deprived of healthy fats, they look very sunken, right? Or
Mhm.
someone who has cancer and they've lost a lot of weight. They look we call it cachectic, like a very shriveled up look. So you want to be, oily and plump in a good way. But if you start to gain too much subcutaneous fat, it shows up through the whole body. And that's an excess energy calorie issue. So for the amount of energy that you're putting out, you're taking, you're eating too much. And so the body will take that fat and store it in the subcutaneous tissue. Now, belly fat, which is also called visceral fat or visceral adiposity, visceral is around the visceral organs, so it's in the belly. That's a different kind of fat. It actually behaves differently. It has its own effects in the body, and it produces hormones, and it also produces inflammation.
Mhm.
So when we have too much belly fat, what happens is we start to create inflammation in the body, and that inflammatory process actually like damages hormone balance as well, because it affects our cortisol stress hormone, it affects our insulin resistance, and so on and so forth. It can affect progesterone, testosterone, estrogen. So fat that accumulates around the waistline, in particular, is very damaging. And I've seen people, and where they're pretty slim around the arms and the legs, but they've got the belly fat. That's actually more damaging from an inflammation and hormone imbalance perspective than someone who's put on some weight all over, and they need to look at their energy, calories in, calories out.
Yeah.
For the belly fat, and I've done a whole series on belly fat on my YouTube video, because on my YouTube channel, it's a belly fat playlist, because you have to look at belly fat from many different angles, right? So one angle is through that gut health. For example, artificial sweeteners such as sucralose and aspartame, they've been shown to cause belly fat in humans. And the connection of that is through the damage to the gut health. So while it may not contribute to increased calories, they've been shown to mess with our hormone balance. You can get insulin resistance with artificial sweeteners over time. And you can get inflammation both in the gut and in that visceral adiposity region in the belly fat. So again, it comes down to our increased understanding of how these artificial ingredients that have made their way into our food chain in the past, because we didn't understand the importance of gut health and how gut health connects with hormone balance, how gut health connects with the stress response, and that we all have a toxins tolerance. Some of us can tolerate these food toxins better than others.
Mhm.
The tipping point will be different depending on your genetics, your previous exposure. Like, for example, if you've had antibiotics in the past or not, if you've had a gut infection in the past or not, how much of these foods you've had in the past. So, that point of being affected really shifts from person to person.
Yeah, yeah. And I raised my hand earlier because I saw that. I've never been a large lady at all. But I was a size 8 only because of my the fat that was around my gut. And when I gave up sugar and reduced carbs out of my life, I got a flat stomach first time in my life after 3 kids. And no longer had that inflammation process that was going on in my body. So what Dr. Mills is sharing is really spot on. And in order to really take your health to that next level, implementing these types of strategies, these 4 pillars, getting in balance, those are the right things to move forward in next level in your health.
Yeah, and actually that reminds me, I started off saying that there are 3 different kinds of carbs.
Yes.
And I talked about the simple carbs. The second kind of carbs are the starch.
Hmm.
So starch is are basically chains of glucose linked together. So you take a lot of the simple glucose and you link them together, that forms starch. And we can find starch in whole foods. You can find them in whole grains, in beans, right? In, vegetables like potatoes, sweet potatoes, squash, and those sorts of things. Some will have more than others, but ultimately, the amount of starch will tell you how much glucose will be released when you eat that food. Now, the release of sugar, of glucose into the blood will be slower than the simple sugars, but ultimately, if you eat a lot of that starch, you're going to eventually get a large glucose hit. And the way to manage that is definitely portion control. If you're eating a high starch food like beans or rice or potatoes or bread or pasta, you want to follow a palm, the size of your palm kind of serving portion rule, which helps keep that amount of starch to a good amount, unless you're someone who is very physically active. So, for example, in places like India, they eat a lot of rice and beans, but then they go out and work on the rice fields and the farms, and they expend a lot of energy. We don't do that. So we do have to look at portion control for our carbs. And then the way we also improve our blood sugar control, blood glucose control with those carbs, because we do need carbs in our diet, especially women. We have carbs for our menstrual cycle and for making our feel-good hormone serotonin in the brain. We have 50% less serotonin than men. And one of the ways we make serotonin is through the consumption of carbs and protein. So we need that, particularly in the 2 weeks before our cycle, right? But in order to eat it without imbalancing our hormone insulin, we need to not just look at the portion of it, but we need to use methods and strategies to slow down the absorption of the starch into our blood and the breakdown of it into glucose. And so there's three strategies. One strategy is by using the third kind of carbohydrate, which is fiber. Now, fiber is interesting, right? Because it's a carbohydrate, but it's not made out of glucose. It's made out of hemicellulose, cellulose, and pectin. It's basically the cell wall of plants, and our body can break it down, but it cannot absorb it. So the fiber, once it goes through the stomach and enters the small intestine, which is just after the stomach, it's now broken down into a gel-like substance, like a mucousy kind of substance, and it coats the lining of that small intestine. And the small intestine is where a lot of the glucose gets absorbed. So if you eat fiber-rich foods before your starch-rich foods, you're going to create this physical barrier for the glucose to be slow, that absorption to be slowed down. So you get less of a stimulation for your hormone insulin to be produced. So adding a high fiber vegetable starter to every meal, including breakfast, and this is where people really kind of go, oh my goodness, we as a society, we've gone from savory breakfasts, which is basically the norm in traditional cultures around the world, to a sweet breakfast, like, croissants or muffins and, bread and all those things. We have lost the tradition of having vegetables or plants with our breakfast. So if we add that back in, that fiber, and fiber-rich plants are things like kale, broccoli, cabbage, cauliflower, mushrooms have a lot of those fiber, glucose, that mucus producing protection, things that's really create that kind of gel-like coating. So those kinds of vegetables, especially if you cook them, as we age, our digestive power goes down. And if you try to eat a lot of those vegetables raw, that's really tough on our digestive system to deal with all of that raw fiber. So, gently cooking those foods, adding some healthy fats and salts for taste, that kind of thing. Because the second and the third strategy have to do with adding fat and protein. Right? So if you add fiber, fats, and protein to your starchy carbohydrates, then you're going to get the best blood sugar response, and that will allow you to eat your bowl of oats, to eat your slice of sourdough bread or whatever bread it is that you're eating, to eat your croissant, right? So even like, Italy, they would have a few bit of asparagus with some sauteed kale and some sun-dried tomatoes and, just some very savory things that would help their blood sugar control. And we need to bring that back in. Turkey, they have cucumbers and olives and fatty cheeses, and so each area has developed these strategies. And in North America, we're like a hodgepodge of people who have come from many different places around the world, and we've adopted this North American diet, which actually is the worst way to start your day. And the way that you eat your breakfast will influence your blood sugar response for every single other meal of the day. So if I give you the same lunch and dinner, but I change your breakfast and I optimize it for that palm-sized serving of starch, but first the vegetables with that healthy oil, olive oil, toasted sesame seed oil with, some vinegar. Vinegar also helps improve blood sugar response, and a palm-sized serving of protein, around 20 to 30 grams of protein per meal. That has been shown in research to improve the blood sugar balance, not just to that breakfast, but to the lunch and the dinner and every single snack that follows after. So breakfast is king or queen, or whatever meal you break your fast with
Mhm.
is the most important.
Well, let's break it down as it relates to Thanksgiving morning and the dinner. So, from a recommendation perspective, give us some ideas on what type of breakfast you would have, and then how would you order your the things that you eat during the Thanksgiving meal or Christmas dinner, um, and what things you might change from that American diet and the way we would normally consume.
Yeah, so the good thing about Thanksgiving and Christmas meals is that there's a lot of really healthy options to choose from. So the way I would start breakfast with either a serving of leftover vegetables from the dinner the night before.
Hmm.
And maybe if you have some leftover, chicken or meat or whatever, or if you want to break an egg for your breakfast that morning, or get an organic tofu, whatever it is that you want to do for your protein. So you've got your vegetables, you've got your protein, and then you choose your carbs. If you like oats, maybe it's a palm-sized serving of oats, or maybe it's a palm-sized serving of bread, or whatever it is that you have as your starchy, but make sure that it's that palm size. First, you're going to eat your vegetables, and then you're going to eat your protein and your carbs. That's the sequence. And actually, that's been studied. That sequence has been studied in research. So that's your breakfast. And then when you sit down to your Thanksgiving or Christmas meal, there's going to probably be some vegetable options. And you're going to start off with the ones that are not starchy. So not the potatoes, but maybe the broccoli or the greens or the salad or the kale or the, cauliflower or whatever it is that you've got as your vegetable. And if you don't, make sure that there is some. And
Hmm.
whenever I host meals, I always make sure at least two people are bringing a vegetable dish that's cooked, and a salad would be ideal too. And I do a combination of salad and cooked vegetables. That's fine. So you have that on your plate, and it should fill about half of your plate. And then the other quarter of your plate is going to be your protein. So it's going to be your turkey or your ham or whatever it is that you're doing. If you're vegetarian or vegan, but you want to make sure you hit that protein. And then the other quarter is going to be the carbs. And now you might have many carbs to choose from. You might have your cranberry sauce. That would go into the carb section, right? You might have the rice. You might have rice and potatoes. You might have stuffing. And this is where the challenge is, but you've got to be aware is that if you want a good blood sugar balance for that meal, all of those things together will equate about the palm size, about a serving of, a size of your palm for a serving. Now, if you want more, then you have to exercise more that day. So maybe earlier you've gone for a run, you've gone for a jog, you've expended a lot of energy, you can get a lot more of those carbs in. Or maybe you make the decision for that meal that, you know what, this is not the meal where I'm going to balance my hormones. Right. It's
Yeah.
Christmas, it's Thanksgiving. I don't care. I'm just going to enjoy this meal. This is 1 year of the day. I'm totally fine with this, and you just eat what feels good. Pay attention to your body, don't get overstuffed, because then it's never a good experience, right? When you overeat and then you regret it. So just more paying attention to chewing your food very well, enjoying the flavors, eating slowly, eating till you're about 80% full so that you don't get overstuffed. I would actually, on a special meal, focus more on enjoying the meal, being mindful, being present, chewing very well, and paying attention to the inner signals of fullness. And it's more about, the days leading up to and after, and your snacks that day, right? So if you've been, overall your lifestyle, if you've been reaching for these, healthy, again, quote unquote, healthy protein bars or granola bars or gluten-free goods or dairy-free, whatever, and they've got those hidden, sneaky additives or excess sneaky sugars, they're going to make you overeat at that meal. And they're going to make you overeat at every single meal you sit down to. So I'm less worried about what someone's going to do on the day of
Sure.
Christmas and Thanksgiving, so long as you enjoy it and you just have a lovely time and you don't overeat to the point where you feel like it hurts, right? It's more about how do you set yourself up so that you can have guilt-free experiences during these special occasions or going out for, meals with friends and those sorts of things, right? So long as it's not your lifestyle, it's the occasional thing. I think you can make good choices within that meal for sure. And I covered that, but I'm not as worried about that single meal.
Good, good. And then always taking a walk afterwards.
Yes,
We try to do
exactly.
that as well.
Exactly. Yeah, going
Mhm.
for a walk, even if you can't, doing some squats. And if you can't do squats, just sitting at the table and raising your heels up from the floor, keeping your toes on the floor, that
Mhm.
activates your calf muscles and that helps suck up some of the sugar from the blood. So, these little strategies. And if you're going to eat dessert or if you're going to eat a sweet treat, eat it after your meal
Mhm.
because then your meal serves as the barrier for that, the sugar from that sweet treat coming in. And if you're going to have wine or alcoholic beverages, try to always have it on a full stomach because wine or alcoholic beverages on an empty stomach do affect our gut health,
Mhm.
right? And so, whereas if you do the exact same amount of wine on a full stomach, it's a totally different animal. You get a very different effect. Now, if you're drinking too much alcohol, it doesn't matter when you have it, but if you're having a reasonable amount, and it's interesting, but it looks like there's lots of research around, for example, if we look at osteoporosis and you want to prevent osteoporosis, it looks like there's a Goldilocks zone for alcohol. So less than 12, like 12.5 grams a day or less is actually protective. Over 50 grams is very damaging, like can actually cause osteoporosis over time. So again, it's not a zero, black and white. It's like, finding the middle way, eating with balance and moderation, and those strategies of, drinking a moderate, small amount of alcohol on a full stomach can over time make a really big difference.
I love it. And then can you thank you for breaking that down as far as what is a safe, healthy um alcohol limit as far as number of grams. What about protein? You mentioned protein being key. What is the average amount of protein one should have during the course of a day in order to keep your blood sugar balanced?
Yeah, and so how much protein you should eat depends on which organ system you're looking at. And when you look at the totality of all the organs, and I like to use the bones and the research in osteoporosis as a really good measure of how much protein we should use, because that research is pretty clear actually in terms of the minimum dose. So for the minimum dose, we should be getting at least 1.2 grams of protein per
Hmm.
kilogram of ideal body weight per day. So if you're underweight, you're going to add add some kilograms to that because you want to reach a healthier, higher weight. If you're overweight, you're going to subtract and you're going to times that kilogram by 1.2. That's the amount you should have per day. And that generally speaking works out to be around 20 to 30 grams of protein per meal. It's better to pace. Protein pacing is better than protein loading all
Hmm.
in one meal. So that means you're getting your protein during breakfast, lunch, and dinner, or if you're having 2 meals a day, you're dividing it, right? I think people run into problems when they try to hit their protein targets using snacks, because that's when they tend to reach for the protein bars, and the protein bars are just pretty much
Yeah,
all
like
not good.
42
Yeah.
grams, some of them 25 grams to
Yeah.
40.
But it's more the additional ingredients. It's the hidden
Yeah.
sugars that come with it. Those protein bars have a lot of food additives and hidden sugars, most of them, right? Not all of them. So I think for me, I hit my protein targets during my meals, and my snacks are like, a handful of nuts or a little bit of seed butter or nut butter with a fruit, right?
Mhm.
And I know, like, for example, I can do an apple with some nuts with good blood sugar balance. The nuts have healthy fiber and fat, not protein, not a lot of protein, but healthy fiber and fat to help buffer that apple, blood sugar. I can only eat half a banana. If I eat more than that, again, I get into too much blood sugar. So like knowing yourself is very important as well, right? You can do an orange, you can do kiwis, you can do a handful of berries. That for me is a really great snack, just, nuts or seeds and fruits. And then you get your protein during your meals. Now, how much is too much? There is such a thing as too much protein.
Mm.
And that's because your liver has to process the protein. And so the maximum amount of protein when we look at that organ, as far as we know, right, is 1.6 grams of protein per kilogram per day.
Right.
Okay. So a range of 1.2 to 1.6, generally 20 to 30 grams of protein per meal, if you're having 3 meals a day, is what it looks like for preventing protein deficiency induced osteoporosis.
I love it. I love it. Well, this has been a wealth of information, and I so appreciate all of you, all of the information that you're pouring into us. How can we get and keep in contact with you? And are there any projects that you would like us to be aware of that would be beneficial to our audience?
Yeah, no, that's great. I know everybody has their favorite way of learning. So, YouTube is one of my favorite ways because that's where you'll find my videos. So, as you mentioned, Dr. Patricia Mills, MD, or my podcast, Wild Wisdom with Dr. Patricia Mills. The Instagram is at dr.patriciamills, and that's the same handle for, LinkedIn. Facebook is Dr. Patricia Mills. I do have a free ebook that I'm gifting your listeners and viewers. Feel free to download that. You'll automatically be enrolled into my newsletter. And through my newsletter, you'll be told about my health promotion programs for women. I run 2 a year. They're standalone and complimentary. I have one coming up that starts end of January called Body Wisdom. And we do things like monitoring blood sugar with continuous glucose monitors, personalizing supplements, looking at the diet very closely, lifestyle strategies to improve those 4 pillars of whole body health. And the elimination diet. So, it can be very simple or comprehensive depending on where you're at with your life, but figuring out whether some food sensitivities that have showed up for you lately is triggering the stress response in your body, which can cause people to food crave and put on weight and those things, even though they may be eating what seems like a healthy diet. So, yeah, I think those are probably the best ways to reach out and get in touch with me and continue to learn with me.
I love it. I love it. Well, thank you so much. And thank you guys for your participation. And we're pre-recording this. So if you have any questions, don't hesitate. I should have said this in the beginning. Don't hesitate to drop them in the chat. And we will make sure to get all of the questions to Dr. Mills. So thank you again, Dr. Mills. And we will see you in the next interview.
Thanks for having me, Kathy, and bye, everybody.